150 sailors, 90 days underwater, 4 meals a day. That's 54,000 meals cooked in a kitchen that's 10 feet by 14 feet, smaller than most apartment bathrooms. But here's what nobody tells you. The hardest part isn't the cramped space or the limited ingredients. It's cooking in a metal tube that's rolling 30 degrees in rough seas, while your oven is bolted to the floor and hot oil is sloshing everywhere. Let me show you how they pull this off. The reality check. Before I show you what these chefs actually cook, you need to understand something most people get completely wrong about submarine food service. The Navy doesn't call them chefs, they're culinary specialists, CS for short. And they're considered the elite of Navy cooks. Here's why that matters. Food on a submarine isn't just about keeping people fed, it's a psychological weapon. When you're trapped in a sealed metal tube with recycled air and no sunlight for 3 months, food becomes the only thing that changes. It's the only variety in your day. The Navy knows this. That's why submarine food is actually better than what you get on surface ships. But here's the catch. You have to cook it in a space so small that only 2 people can work at the same time without bumping into each other. Let me paint you a picture of this galley. 10 feet by 14 feet. That's 140 square feet total. For comparison, the average home kitchen is 200 square feet. And you're cooking for what? 4 people? Maybe 6? These guys are feeding 150. In that tiny space, they've crammed electric ovens, grills, deep fryers, industrial mixers, reach-in freezers, and a dishwashing station. Everything is bolted down with 4 to 6 inch legs because when the submarine dives or surfaces, the whole boat tilts. If your equipment isn't secured, it becomes a 300-pound projectile. But the real challenge, the equipment has to be modular. Here's what I mean by that. Submarines have hatches that are only 25 inches wide. That's barely 2 feet. So every single piece of equipment in that galley, the ovens, the fryers, the freezers, has to be able to break down into pieces small enough to fit through that hatch. You can't just buy commercial kitchen equipment and install it. Everything is custom built for submarines. So that's the space they're working with. A kitchen smaller than your bathroom with equipment that has to survive being tilted 30 degrees and shaken by depth charges. But the space is just the beginning. The real question is, what are they actually cooking? The menu. Now let's talk about the food, and this is where it gets interesting. Most people think submarine food is just MRES and canned rations. They're dead wrong. The Navy uses something called the Standard Core Menu, a rotating cycle designed specifically for submarine endurance. Every meal has to hit specific nutrition targets. Less than 15 grams of fat per entree, high fiber, balanced vitamins. But here's the genius part. They color code everything using a system called Go for Green. Green items are the healthiest, low fat, high fiber, nutrient dense. Yellow items are moderate. Red items are the occasional treats. The goal? Keep the crew healthy enough to operate a nuclear reactor for 90 days straight. But they also have to keep morale high. So the menu rotates to prevent boredom. Here's what a typical day looks like. Breakfast at 6:30, eggs, bacon, pancakes, cereal, the works. But here's something most people don't know. They serve breakfast for 2 hours straight because the crew works in rotating shifts. Some guys are just waking up while others are finishing their night watch. Lunch at 11:30, grilled items, sandwiches, soup. They always have 2 entree options because if you're stuck eating the same food for 90 days, variety keeps you sane. Dinner at 16:45, this is the big meal. Roasts, fish, pasta, vegetables, they go all out. But then there's the 4th meal that nobody talks about. Midrats, midnight rations, served at 2400 hours for the sailors coming off the night watch. It's usually lighter fare, soups, sandwiches, leftovers from dinner, but it's critical because these guys just worked a 6-hour shift monitoring nuclear reactors and torpedo systems. They need fuel. Now here's where it gets wild. On holidays, Thanksgiving, Christmas, 4th of July, the CSS go absolutely crazy. Turkey with all the fixings, prime rib, lobster tails. I'm talking restaurant quality food cooked in a closet-sized kitchen while the submarine is 800 feet underwater. I talked to a former CS who served on the USS South Dakota. He told me they once cooked 40 pounds of pulled pork from scratch for a 4th of July barbecue in a galley with 1 oven while the submarine was running drills. That's the level of skill we're talking about, so that's what they're cooking. 4 meals a day, rotating menus, holiday feasts, but none of that matters if you can't store the food. And that's where things get really complicated. The storage nightmare. Let me ask you a question. Where do you store 90 days worth of food for 150 people on a submarine? The answer is going to surprise you. Submarines don't make port calls during deployment. Once you dive, you're on your own. That means you have to load enough food to last the entire mission. No resupply, no grocery runs. The math is insane. For a 90-day patrol, a submarine carries approximately 18,000 eggs, 2,500 pounds of meat, 1,000 pounds of vegetables, and enough coffee to fill a bathtub. But here's the problem. Submarines don't have a lot of extra space. Every cubic foot is accounted for. Weapons, torpedoes, nuclear reactor, crew quarters, navigation systems. So where does the food go? They get creative. There are official storerooms, dry storage kept below 70 degrees, refrigerated storage at 32 to 41 degrees, and frozen storage at 0 or below. But that's not enough space, so they store food everywhere else. Canned goods get stacked in corridors. Sailors walk past cases of tomato sauce and green beans on their way to their bunks. Potatoes and onions get stored in mesh bags hung from the ceiling. Some submarines even store food under the floor panels in crew berthing areas. One former submariner told me he slept on top of a case of canned ravioli for the first 2 weeks of deployment. Once they ate through it, he finally had room to store his personal gear. But storage isn't just about finding space, it's about managing inventory so nothing spoils. They use a system called FIFO, first in, first out. Everything gets labelled with the date it was loaded. The oldest items get used first. Temperatures get logged twice a day. If a freezer breaks down, they have 4 hours to move everything before it spoils. And here's something most people don't know. They can't just throw away spoiled food. When you're underwater, you can't just toss garbage overboard. It would leave a trail of debris that enemy sonar could track. So they use garbage grinders that can process 400 to 1,600 pounds of waste per hour. Food waste gets pulped and discharged through special systems that don't leave a trace. So that's how they store and manage 90 days of food in a space that wasn't designed for it. But storing food is one thing. Actually cooking it while the submarine is diving, surfacing, and dodging enemy ships, that's a whole different level. Cooking in chaos. Now let me show you what it's actually like to cook on a submarine. And this is the part that separates submarine CSS from every other cook in the military. Imagine you're making dinner for 150 people. You've got pots on the stove, food in the oven, oil heating in the fryer. Now imagine the floor suddenly tilts 15 degrees to the left, then 20 degrees forward. Then it levels out and drops 200 feet in 30 seconds. That's what cooking on a submarine is like. The technical term is operating in a high vibration environment. The reality is chaos. When the submarine dives or surfaces, everything shifts. Pots slide, oil sloshes. If you're not holding onto something, you're going to fall. But the food still has to be ready at 11:30 for lunch service. So how do they handle it? First, everything gets secured. Pots have special clamps. Mixing bowls have non-slip bases. Even the cutting boards are designed to stay in place. Second, they work in shifts. Usually 4 to 6 CSS per submarine working around the clock. One CS handles breakfast, another preps for lunch. A third is already working on dinner, and someone is always cleaning. But here's the secret weapon. They use something called batch cooking. Instead of cooking all 150 portions at once, they cook in small batches, 15 to 20 portions at a time. Why? Because if you cook everything at once and the submarine suddenly tilts, you just ruined 150 meals. But if you're only cooking 15 portions and something goes wrong, you've only lost 15 meals. You can recover from that. Third, they prep everything in advance. Vegetables get chopped hours before they're needed. Meat gets portioned and stored. Sauces get made ahead of time. This is where the 4-hour initial sanitation training comes in. Every CS has to know food safety inside and out because one case of food poisoning on a submarine could take out half the crew. There's a story from the USS Miami about a CS who was making fried chicken during a drill. The submarine suddenly went into a steep dive. The fryer oil started sloshing. He had to hold the fryer steady with one hand while pulling chicken out with the other. He didn't spill a drop. And the chicken was still perfect. That's the level of skill these guys have. And so that's how they cook in chaos. Secured equipment, batch cooking, advanced prep, and nerves of steel. But even with all that skill, there are still challenges that can break even the best CS. The struggles. Let me tell you about the things that keep submarine CSS up at night. And I'm not talking about the cooking. The biggest challenge isn't the space or the motion or even the long hours. It's the pressure. Food is the only thing on a submarine that changes. Everything else is routine, same walls, same air, same faces. If the food is bad, morale tanks. And when morale tanks on a submarine, missions fail. So CSS carry this weight. They're responsible for keeping 150 sailors mentally stable through food. But they're working with limited ingredients, limited equipment, and zero zero room for error. Here are the three biggest struggles they face. First, equipment breakdowns. When your oven breaks on land, you call a repair guy. When your oven breaks 1,000 feet underwater, you fix it yourself or you don't eat. CSS have to be part cook, part mechanic. They learn how to troubleshoot fryers, repair mixers, and jury-rig solutions with whatever parts they have on hand. One CS told me he once fixed a broken oven timer using a digital watch and duct tape. It worked for the rest of the deployment. Second, running out of ingredients. You plan for 90 days. But what if the mission gets extended to 100 days, 110 days? You start rationing. Fresh vegetables run out first, usually within 2 weeks, then fresh fruit, then fresh milk. By week 6, you're working with canned, frozen, and dehydrated ingredients. You have to get creative. One CS told me he made fresh salsa using canned tomatoes, dehydrated onions, and jalapenos from a jar. The crew loved it because it was the first thing that tasted fresh in a month. Third, the mental exhaustion. CSS work 12 to 16-hour days every day for 90 days straight. They're on their feet the entire time in a hot, cramped space with no breaks, no days off, and if they mess up, if they undercook chicken or cross-contaminate food, people get sick. In a sealed environment, foodborne illness spreads fast. The pressure is constant. So those are the struggles: equipment failures, supply limitations, and mental exhaustion. But despite all of that, these CSS pull off something remarkable: the accomplishment. Here's what most people don't understand about submarine CSS. They're not just cooks. They're artists working under impossible conditions. Think about what they accomplish. 54,000 meals over 90 days in a 140 square foot kitchen while the floor is tilting, with limited ingredients and zero room for error. And the food is good, not just edible, actually good. Submarine food has a reputation in the Navy. It's the best food you'll get in the military. Surface ships, the food is okay. Shore bases, cafeteria quality, but submarines? The CSS take pride in their work. They compete to see who can make the best holiday meal. They experiment with recipes. They take requests. One CS told me he learned to make Filipino adobo because 3 sailors on his boat were Filipino and they were homesick. He taught himself from a recipe book and nailed it on the first try. Here's why submarine CSS are so good. They're hand-picked. The Navy doesn't send just anyone to submarine duty. You have to volunteer. You have to pass psychological evaluations, and you have to prove you can handle the pressure. Then they get specialized training. They learn not just cooking, but food safety, inventory management, equipment repair, and crisis management. By the time they step into that galley, they're ready for anything. There's a saying in the submarine community: there are 2 types of ships, submarines and targets. The CSS have their own version. There are 2 types of cooks, submarine CSS and everyone else. It's not arrogance, it's earned. So that's the reality of feeding 150 sailors in a kitchen smaller than your bathroom. It's not just cooking, it's engineering, it's psychology, it's survival. And the CSS who do it, they're some of the most skilled, most resilient, most underappreciated. Now, you know how submarine chefs feed 150 sailors in impossible conditions. It's not just cooking, it's engineering, it's psychology, it's survival under pressure. These culinary specialists work 16-hour days in a space smaller than your bathroom, cooking restaurant-quality meals while the floor tilts beneath them. They're mechanics when equipment breaks. They're psychologists keeping morale alive. They're artists working with canned goods and frozen meat, and they do it all in a sealed metal tube 1,000 feet underwater with zero room for error. That's the reality of submarine food service, and that's why submarine CSS are some of the most skilled, most resilient, and most underappreciated professionals in the entire military. We are committed to releasing 2 videos a week. Like, share, subscribe, and hit the bell icon for more AnchorWatch.